Okay, today we're going to look at another piece of work done by Robert Sepehr. He has really been knocking it out of the park lately, and you should look at his videos just in separate. He generally does put it on this channel now, but he also has Atlantean Gardens, and he generally puts videos on there also. Some are different on each of the channel. Other times it seems he's put copies of each one up under different ones. But what we're looking at here is what's been found with genetics in more common studies, verifying something that has been said for well over 100 years, and then it becomes vindicated whenever we can get something like genetics and it steps up to the plate. It's really a burgeoning science that is showing us the truth and the reality of how humans came to be. So let's catch his intro here before we get into anything.
Past studies of human genetics have proposed the theory that modern humans originated from a single population in Africa. But a new paper published last week in the journal Nature put this idea to the test and concluded that it does not hold up.
So what we're looking at here is a study that says it offers a new twist in how the first humans evolved. A new genetic analysis of 290 people across different populations in Africa, such as Congoids, or the Khoisan, or the Pygmies, or the people past the Horn, or Nilotics. And they compared that to other genetics that they already have the full genomes and so on, and they made some revelations here. Just like it had been done recently with Chris Stringer, just looking at craniometry and things, he's reclassified some things. And Robert also makes a mention of this fact too. But this states that excavations at the Jebel Irhoud archaeological site in Morocco, where over 300,000-year-old fossils, maybe the oldest evidence of Homo sapiens, were found in 2017. I've done separate videos about this because it predates Homo sapiens, our modern human form, by over 100,000 years. And seeing as how we're looking at about 325,000 years, perhaps as much as 340 to 360 of noticed habitation that's associated with the people that they do find a burial of later. So it may have gone on for over 40,000 years before the person that is interred that they found the skeleton of. But in doing so, that added about 1/3 to the time of Homo sapiens. And the problem and issues were with archaeology that nobody really knew. I mean, when you're a kid, you get taught that there's this linear line to the way that it goes up. And they show you an evolutionary chart all the way from a monkey all the way up to a human. And really that's a false representation. And I've made other videos talking about that, how one of the guys is not even legally there. And then two of the others that are inside of that 10 or 12 that they've got from a monkey to man aren't, we know for a fact, are not something that's on our lineage, but it kind of looks like it fits. Some people along the human line have actually not made it. The things that you find in the earliest point and then the things that you see now are not a culmination of all those things. But there is a blend of things there. Human genetics and humanity just before the end of the last ice age was quite different. I've got a video that I keep swear is coming up, but other things keep moving, things like this knowledge here just coming out maybe 2 weeks ago with this paper that's shown. And we get to talk to a doctor and stuff. But they keep moving up a little bit because of importance and also carrying on with the linear fashion of what we've been talking about in other situations and videos on the channel. So it kind of is a vindication video here too, and he claims it is for him, and I'm sure others that are involved in archaeology will claim the same with what this comes to find out. But that problem was there in the fact that already at 200,000, we already knew that, well, Homo erectus didn't die off at 600,000 or 700,000 years ago and then slowly become this other person. The Homo erectus we thought turned into this is still existing, and we found them all the way going up even until the end of the last ice age in certain places, which we'll talk about later. And so there wasn't this linear thing in any way, and that's been blown out of the water long ago, but I don't know why they still try to teach it. But he's going to tell you it has something to do with the UN and an edict and what they wanted to come out with shortly after World War II, which almost sounds like probably the wrong people were behind that thing if you look at who you thought maybe almost just won World War II but didn't, and what they would have come up with. And then you hear the things that are coming up with these people about all of humanity and this United Nations idea and so on too. Let's just get into this a little more. But 290 people, different genetics, and they found wild variations in specific locales and loci and things that show you that, well, let's just get into it here in a minute.
Idea to the test and concluded that it does not hold up. The new data is based on the genomes of 290 living people from southern, eastern, and western Africa. The findings suggest that modern humans descended from populations of different hominin species that mix genes rather than on a singular demographic that mutated and evolved in a linear fashion.
In other words, even when we get to the point where we were never chimpanzees, people, they've never tried to say that, but they keep comparing and doing it, and everybody goes, we were never chimps. No, we never were chimps. In fact, when we were like or akin to the thing that ended up becoming the chimp wasn't a chimp, and we weren't a chimp either. We were a primate type of thing that was evolving from the end of the dinosaur at 65 million years ago. Any of that cataclysm was something like a shrew. Okay, well, here's the idea. They want you to think that we all came from this one monkey people, right? No, many monkey people came out of the shrew-like creature. Dating, no, not even 5 to 7 million years ago, but something like 35. And that there was hybridization back with each other in locales that overlapped, just like you think of different groups of monkeys being in the trees. We are primates. And so they ended up getting crosses that were going on there that some things never were involved with, other things were. Others had both of those hybrids and another. Other ones didn't have anything but then the other, and it made them a lot different and so on. And this is well before any human skeleton. This is like pre-Lucy and stuff like that, if you will, and through that time. And in fact, really kind of goes all the way through the last ice age. In fact, there are instances where it comes much more modern. And in fact, it's still kind of going on now.
When asked about the DNA evidence, Eleanor Seri, an evolutionary archaeologist at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, said, quote, "There is no single birthplace. It really puts a nail in the coffin of that idea."
Well, she thinks this is the nail, but I've shown you about 6, maybe 7 videos that other people have been attacking this out of Africa theory, and it actually has become that they're attacking a straw man. But it's weird. Let me explain. The straw man they're attacking is what's still taught to your kids if they never get into college studies or anything above, because then we have what I talked about in a recent video. I don't even know if I put it out. Like Africa 3.2, out of Africa 3.2. It has to do with the same concept here. Okay, so so our evolution over time of what we call when we called out of Africa, and of course there were some that went out of Africa, and other ones that didn't, like the group that they're looking at here and comparing it to everybody else on Earth and seeing what happened there, because we've been stuck in this out of Africa thing ever since Darwin did it in the first place. And by the way, one of the major contributors to him doing it in the first place is that he realized that all the blacks in sub-Saharan Africa were very much more like Homo erectus, and there was a time up until, well, the 1920s or a little after, that they used to be called the missing link, that they realized that even looking at their skulls of a modern one, that's like a mix between the Homo erectus type people that were in Africa and the modern person, which they didn't understand at that time, that they had been admixed just prior to that point from that same type of people. And so that's what had given them that phenotype. And it really is a lot more about hybridization than it is about evolution, especially when we're talking about humans. I explained in another video, but let me parse it here real quick. It takes a whale 4.6 million years for them to show you that this flipper kind of changed into this flipper. But in about half that amount of time, we've turned from a monkey man thing all the way into the spaceman. Does it make any sense to anybody? Sure, there are ideas the aliens came down and messed with people, and apparently one more than another, and so on. And we might talk about that here in a little bit too. But by the way, if it goes to a part 2, it's in the top left-hand corner. But leaving alone the sci-fi concept of it and just keeping the sci in it, science is showing us that people had a different linear fashion. In fact, that one video I'm telling you that I still have yet to put out is about the why bottleneck in humanity, that we have found quite a few people and gotten their DNA now from just before that, and they have wild little haplogroups and so on too, and they're associated with the same people, but only like a strainer right there at that younger Dryas boundary event. Very few of the Y chromosomal people made it through there. One of which is Y chromosomal Adam, luckily, and it's how they get that name. Just like through a weird filter idea, they get this idea of a African Eve, which has already been blown out the water, and I think 3 different people here will tell you about that. Let's get into this so we can get on with it though, because this is showing that all over the place, and there's been a lot of other suspect sites where they go, well, this dates around the time of Lucy, and it looks more even human than Lucy, and it's out here up in Greece. So how does that work? Because there'd be a devolution to end up hitting to that point. So is it possible that that even goes the other way? There's a lot of questionable things like that that show you that Oranopithecus, Freibergi, and Gracopithecus have this effect of showing that, well before the Homo erectus different forms are out there, there's also these things that are out there. And if you've noticed and been into it at all, they've tried to write off a whole lot of these people. In fact, supposedly the Out of Africa event happened a few different times, but only stuck to the wall after about 70,000 BC and so on too. Why is that stated? Well, it's because we found them going out quite a few times. One of which I made a video about ancient maritime boating. It's a 3-part series, and it contains a thing about Chris Stringer and evolution and so on too. because it answers two questions inside of one there, and just giving you an example of differentials, I guess. But they show that, well, there's this island out in the Aegean, and they found Cro-Magnon on there, and Homo sapiens, and actually what they believe is Neanderthal too. All right, and the Dima Cave and so on. And so what's the deal with that? Well, it dates at least 165,000 years, and these people have had to have used a boat. So things are radically out of order in a lot of ways of people thinking about it. You know, big ones that come to my mind and things that have happened is like the Iron Age has been changed by 1,800 years, and nobody's talking about it. The fact that, well, somewhere around 7,800 BC, 7,600 BC, we found a place that has a concrete terrazzo floor with a pleat in it to allow it to be washed out and go out like into a drain system. And it's concrete or terrazzo type floors. But then we found a terrazzo floor in this huge expanse of one of the sites in Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe. And it's all a concrete floor. But these people don't have pottery yet, but they have stonework that leads to that incredible stonework that we find at Egypt in the first dynasties that they keep wanting to claim. They must have had rotoplower lathes and so on. But I've made a few videos showing you, well, here's somebody just taking a few rocks and rubbing on rocks and spinning the thing around, and eventually there it is. Sure, there's a core hole saw, the things that we give credit for. Which is what we're not doing, is we're trying to give credit to aliens or all kinds of freak out things, other than to say that these people, these advanced Caucasians here at the time, which is another problem in a modern day, knew a whole lot more. They didn't, they knew about rocks and they stacked a bunch up over here. No, there's sacred geometry in that and all kinds of things lined up to due north better than most any building in New York. Let's get on with it.
Rather than envisioning human evolution as a tree with a singular stem that splits into disconnected branches, the researchers describe ancestral human populations as intertwining stems, or cross-species interracial breeding or hybridization. For the new study, the researchers looked at genomic data from living populations scattered all over Africa. I'm
going to stop it there and back it just a second. Right here on this line, although I thought it was highlighted, so it's probably on here twice in a picture, it shows you that not only did the Neanderthals and Homo neanderthalis breed with Homo sapiens, and the Denisovans were familiar, which were real conspecifics and what they believe in Neanderthals and how advanced they were today. And you really wouldn't even notice one versus the pictures they used to do just 30, 40 years ago and show when I was a kid that they were all looking like a caveman or worse, and then tried to show you it's so easy a caveman can do it, and you're supposed to think, well, that must be Cro-Magnon, and then we look at that and no, that's not true. The haplogroup that Cro-Magnon has been found with, at least at Puglisi Cave at 29,000 BC, as a haplogroup that's still extant here today. It's the reason they started making comments like, you would notice the difference if the guy shaved and put clothes on. It'd actually be kind of like that kid's movie, what is it, Encino Man or whatever, where if you could just get the guy to straighten up and speak right, ta-da. But other than people that are advanced like that, interbreeding and giving traits to each other, there was also Homo erectus and Homo habilis that are involved with different people in the planet, that actually Cro-Magnon man says here at Homo sapiens had also bred with, other than Neanderthals, but with Homo erectus and Homo habilis. We'll get into that in a minute.
The genomic data from living populations scattered all over Africa, as well as DNA from living Europeans and from the remains of a Neanderthal. Jessica Thompson, a paleoanthropologist at Yale University said, quote, "People alive today may be quite different from those who lived in the same place in the past," implying that one should not look at modern demographics in a given region and assume that is what populations in antiquity looked like racially.
Well, the strange thing you get out of that is that there were some people that were still Homo erectus types at just before 4400 BC, like in the Congo. In fact, their DNA, which he talks about here and later, shows up to a 19% unknown ghost hominid that was a hominid species. And after hemming and hawing around on what it could be, they figured out, well, it's themselves. It's what's left of that original genetics that was there just, say, 4500 BC, and that larger brained hominid hybrid that was created kind of took over the whole area of sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a different interaction than what happened to the Khoisan at a earlier time, actually. And nilotics and things that had been impinged upon well before. And you know how genetics can look at these things and tell you, well, this must have been back about this far because of the way that it seats in its loci and everything. That they can tell the times that these impinging events happened, and also multiple events now. They can see that, well, one happened here, but then there's another layer on top right here of something different. And one easy way to tell is that loci that gets to that one point, that first one I told you about, there are people that have that, and so they know what that whole song in the record sounds like. And when you get in the middle of this other song, it changes and becomes something totally different, like a Pink Floyd song, and doesn't sound the same anymore. And that's how they know an interjecting of where you've got part of this and part of that. Now, they're trying to figure out if they get good enough that even back in the day, if they can figure out if that person that impinged upon you was a mix or if it was two separate events also. You follow me? And it's a real touchy subject because we're talking about humans. They do it with dogs and stuff like that all the time, or any other creatures on the planet, or plants, or anything else they can get DNA out of. That's fine. But it sure gets personal when we start talking about ourselves, doesn't it? It's what's held us back here. But at least we're at the point of DNA having enough knowledge, and then we step up to the plate with it. And what it shows us is something that's quite a bit different than the model that we supposedly had going on.
Using the modern DNA, the researchers scientifically ruled out the possibility that humanity had a singular point of origin, but instead must have had multiple points of origin, rendering the concept of an African Eve as obsolete and outdated. Had humans originated in one spot, the oldest artifacts would have been found there, with increasingly more recent remains found at sites emanating from the origin, but that's not the case.
So the concept he just gave there is that if we found somebody that was Homo erectus turning into Homo sapiens, we should see that radiating out, maybe blurbed in one direction, who knows what, but we should see it like that. But of course, from what I just told you a moment ago at 4500 BC, that didn't happen. In fact, these people, if we're looking at what's around in the modern, these people took a total different journey and from a different origins point than these other people right over here. Much less these people way the heck over here. Whereas when an idea first came out, we all came from a certain one point and we all came out and bloomed like a flower. Well, that really was trying to talk about one set of people and not the reality of everybody. Once they got into the depth of everybody, they're all different flowers and they have different origins. And just because they have a flower doesn't mean that they're all the same.
While the modern genomic studies continue to vindicate the efforts of anthropologists such as myself,
And me, and quite a few other people that I know,
that have argued against the politically motivated models concerning humanity's allegedly singular African origin, as put forth by the United Nations at the close of World War II. That was over 70 years ago, and it's time now to follow the science and accept that the DNA evidence is correct, rather than insist on what is politically correct. As the woke ideology that has plagued all levels of federally funded academia continues to postulate that there's no such thing as gender, and that terms like man, woman, or race should not be used in the field of archaeology or anthropology, the fossil record and genetic research shows that male and female are biological realities, as is the revelation that the out of Africa replacement hypothesis is an Afrocentric Marxist fairy tale that has been officially debunked. Instead,
and it's been debunked over and over and from different viewpoints and aspects. It's almost like you put that thing in the box and then you start stabbing swords through it at all different angles like a magician, and people are wondering, oh my God, how yeah? And then you pull all the swords out and the guy pops right back out. Well, there's a trick to the way that you do that too. And instead of relying on believing in a trick or some kind of false dichotic magic thing that happened, DNA again steps up to the plate and goes, well, there were some people that said this, but we try to say that's racist now. But here's what all archaeology says, and yep, and that's where they got it from. And wow, if you don't know, you won't ever know. But here's what archaeology shows. And it's where that person that you're trying to talk down to and everything, oh, because you've got a magic word now. It's gone past pathetic. And it's not like I feel like we're at the end of it. But then again, there are things that are just knocking the legs out from up under that chair. And I don't know if you've ever tried to stand on a 3-legged chair, but it's pretty tough. But when it gets to 2, that thing falls pretty quick. Anyhow, these agendas that are pushed on people, and as he explained, that was kind of like after World War II where they started up this agenda on this crap, and I grew up learning it like it was supposed to be happening. Imagine the fact of that happening to me, and then what I'm seeing in a modern day where they're trying to talk about how, I don't know if it's a woman or it's man, da da da. I saw a video the other day where a lady telling you that a man can get pregnant and have periods. And then to get told by the doctor that's right there in front of them that, no, that can't happen. I mean, we can't even do like a womb transplant and try to even make that happen. I could stab you up in your butt with a knife and you could put in a tampon, but there's not anything like that going to go on. Some people look at this and they say things like, well, see, those won't breed. And because we're having a population problem, I guess it's okay, especially if they're going to act like that. No comment.
Instead, the DNA and actual fossil record tells a very different story for how humans of the Holocene came to be. Anthropologist Susan B. Martinez has a doctorate in anthropology from Columbia University and is author of The Mysterious Origins of Hybrid Man, Crossbreeding and the Unexpected Family Tree of Humanity. She claims that modern humanity did not evolve, but is a mosaic of mixed ancestry, the result of eons of crossbreeding and retrobreeding among different groups, including Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Denisovans, hobbits, giants, and other as of yet undiscovered hominins, which fall under the general category of Homo erectus.
Now, the thing is that when I was a kid, they were going, oh, well, here's some stuff we can figure out, and the rest of it we can't, so we're going to call it junk DNA. Well, we're coming to find out that junk DNA is all full of information too. It's not like the 3 best songs on the double album live set are the ones that you like best, so you just keep hitting those numbers. But there's a whole lot of other music going on here, and also they've noticed that in that portion, there are places that we can see archaic admixtures still existing, and because of the blends that we figured out went on here and didn't go on there, and how that's different song in that different spot, they're like, aha. But then somebody, of course, the easy way to figure it out is somebody that breeds with them, and then they get that song, and then they go, okay. And it's much more complicated than that, people. I'm just trying to give an idea and the concept in mind of how something like this comes about, and next thing you know, there's a Bee Gees song in the middle of your Van Halen album. But again, back to these whales idea, and it takes 4.6 million years for a whale to look like this and look like that and be slightly different. Something that he's going to talk about coming up, and something that shows that not only did Homo whatever hybrid around and do things, but because of selective breeding and all these different things, it stretched out different variants in different places. It's how we get Oriental people. It's how we got the blends that ended up being a lot of different people on the world, if you look at it that simple. And you don't think it could happen that well, but look what we've been able to do with dogs just in the last few thousand years. Give it 10 or 12 for total timing. But also, hybrids can happen that are so far apart you don't even really know that that's what's happening. Whenever you find something and you thought of a wolf and a husky getting together, that may not seem weird to you. But what about something that's actually derived from that, and a little Chihuahua dog or something that's different than that, and a wolf? Are they able to breed together too? Well, sure, they're close enough. Well, some of these things can be pretty far apart on that spectrum and still breed together and cause hybrids. But it takes 4.6 million to make a whale change that flipper. But inside that same amount of time, we've become this massive field of flowers. It makes no sense until maybe you compare it to something like, look at all the different dogs we have. And this shows you that there's a mechanism that's working on humans that didn't work on any other creature in the planet.
Let us listen to this brief excerpt on what she has to say about the ancient interracial cross-species interbreeding and the origins of the modern races.
How did the different types or races of man, if you will, appear on the planet?
By hybrid mixes. And that's how all the races came about, through mixings and crossbreeding.
Yeah, because I never bought into the story that someone could walk out of Africa and then over time, the skin tone changes, the facial features, and the structure of the hair changes.
The skull, everything else, something radically different. And they still are, in a way, pushing this idea that if you just hang around in Switzerland or the cold for a while, you'll turn into a Switzerland people. Anybody think that's the way that works in any way, shape, or form?
Really bought into that.
Yeah, and that's what we're taught, and that's what textbooks say, but it's false. And we need to understand what the true history is. Out of Africa, the African Garden of Eden has become a strict part of the Darwinian paradigm. This is where the professors and experts tell us that all mankind came from.
You notice these pictures that we're showing you here? These are different people that are recreated living through times from 160,000 BC. I think there's a couple of them probably older than that, all the way down to a modern time. Again, the problem with that is they don't actually show you in the museum, the exhibit, because of feelings and so on, that some of these people were going on until a real modern time. Did you see that Caucasian looking kind of one? There's only one of them thrown in there. See how advanced he kind of was? He predates a lot of these other people that are still hominids at this time. It's kind of crazy when you think about it compared to what they try to teach you. And everybody floated out like this. Everybody did this, like at the same time. And they want you to get you to believe that simultaneously everybody created agriculture. Versus when archaeology goes, well, who are these people that, oops. And it looks like, let me go back in their history. Whoops, they're the ones that had agriculture before anybody. And horses, and this, and that, and that. And everywhere that Mary went, that lamb sure went with them. And then these people have that. And the cows. And wow, that's amazing.
From Africa, I don't believe this is true. This is only about 25 years ago that the African Garden of Eden, the African Eve, became popular and became a fixed idea in Darwinian evolutionism. But it's not true. And as you say, it would be impossible for the African to migrate out and go to Sweden and turn white, to go to China and turn yellow. Those are fairy tales that did.
Fairy tales, she's telling you. Even though it's sticking out of the picture, you can see the subnasal prognathism shown on the individual on the right, versus the extremely flat face and tucked in, but still has a chin on the left side. If we were to do that with a Caucasian, they'd have a little more of a chin. And anybody that supposedly has a chin has had interactions with somebody who's related to the ancient Cro-Magnon type people that had the first chins, because they seem to have gotten impinged upon and gone from a chinless people to a chinned people. But also during that same time, their top of their head cranial capacity has gone from smaller to larger.
It's still teaching in school.
While there's always someone who will remark.
I'm going to back that up 10 seconds and let her speak the last statement clearly. Let's go from, you can't just turn into a Swedish person.
Be impossible for the African to migrate out and go to Sweden and turn white, to go to China and turn yellow. Those are fairy tales that they're still teaching in school.
While there's always someone who will remark that if Cro-Magnon and Homo erectus could mate and produce viable offspring, doesn't that make them the same species? And the answer is no.
Definitely not. It just shows that they're closely related enough for that type of thing to happen. In fact, secret be known, some of those whales that we've seen in the evolutionary charts are due to hybridization with a different kind of whale. And when that happens, apparently due to behaviorism, they're shunned by both of the other kind of whales, and now you get a third kind of whale that shows up. Whether it hits an ecological niche and it's able to prosper or not is left up to the whim of chance and the fates, if you will.
There are many examples in nature of different species that can reproduce to create hybrids, but they're understood as being distinct, especially with the advances in genetics made during the last decade. There are similar looking primates, for example, that have a different number of chromosomes, like the howler monkeys in Tabasco, Mexico.
Now these are two groups that are radically different, and science is using them as a calibration towards this whole concept, because until you had genetics, you wouldn't have even thought anything at all. But yet, whenever you look at them genetics, they've even got different number of chromosomes and everything. It blows you away when you go, these and those. But then at that same point, they have hybridization, and as he's going to tell you, those third part are kind of kicked out, almost like a primate racism, if you will. But that's how a different evolution will happen, and something different kicks off. Whether it, in your appearance, it's actually a minor point. It also looks like these apes look like each other and have similar behaviors a lot more from something called convergence than it does from the naturality of things. Well, it is in the naturality of things, but in a point of convergence.
And while a small portion of their population do produce hybrids, the hybrids are not allowed back into the general population of either species and are restricted by the monkeys themselves into a hybrid zone, which in effect is a sort of simian racism. Lions and tigers are distinct. They hunt differently, behave differently, look and act differently, yet
have different sexual dimorphism. The huge male versus the females of the lion versus the tiger, it's pretty darn hard to tell the difference in sexual dimorphism of those two. One of them's known to swim, the other one abhors water. It's just all of these different things, but yet they're similar felines, or cats, or in the Panthera family, or whichever way you want to look at it. But they're radically different enough, and most people would say, well, they can't breed together. And they thought at first when they did, they were like a mule, where a donkey and a horse gets together, and even though it does make a viable offspring, that thing is no longer able to breed. It becomes a sterile unit. They come to find out, well, certain ways you breed them, it makes that happen, but if you do it the other way, that female is extremely fertile, and she can breed with a tiger or a lion, just as successful. And if we take that hybrid and we don't trap it in a zoo, it will probably become something that's separated off, and then over time we end up having this giant liger, which is quite different than either one of the parents. And it starts to lose its stripes, but looks like a tiger, but da-da-da, and so now you end up with something different. And that's small scale, people. You put that on the engine and run it up, wah, and get it going, and you can make radical things happen. It still doesn't explain, and I still don't think hybridization totally explains how different people popped up, or that this advanced human that now becomes a spaceman just comes out of this like a popcorn, poof. There's got to be something else in the mix that we're not quite adding in. I'm not calling aliens at this point, but there is a box full of that bullshit sitting right over there we can get into. And I have shown recent things, even like a cave art, just to keep every once in a while. I don't want my challenge to be about like, oh, and it was aliens. But there's something in the middle of that mix that shows you a radical evolution that doesn't fit anything else we've ever seen. And in fact, we're finding out now that a lot of the evolution that we talk about and we see over 4.6 million years and all that is still hybridization.
They can and have produced ligers, which despite popular opinion are viable, as their offspring can also reproduce with either lions or tigers. That said, I came across an article this week quoting Professor Stringer, a British physical anthropologist noted for his work on human evolution and considered one of the world's foremost experts and proponents of the now obsolete and debunked out of Africa replacement model, which argued that human species left Africa and mutated into the various races we have today, killing or replacing the other hominins. We now know conclusively, genetically, that this is false, and that the various races exist today because of hybridization. We are all various mixes of these different hominin species.
And a lot of this hybridization happened with things that were already out of Africa and wild variations. Example is, if you look at Homo erectus, you just Google image it, and like 40 pictures will show up, and you look through them, you're gonna sure see a lot of the same ones and same pictures from different angles people have taken and so on. But you'll also see radical variations on what that is. And not to stifle the whole thing, if we were to turn around and give each one of these a known name, if you are in archaeology, you start to know about certain ones like Sadiba and Gorobo and these places, and they're named by them, and you can use that in concepts and ideas that you're talking to each other, and people usually understand the differences that are shown there, but there are radical differences between them that show that they each deserve their own name, pretty much. And I don't know if you noticed here, but also there's been this trend in the last 20, 30, 40 years, maybe maximum, of trying to say us at Neanderthals and us at Denisovans, because we've got still some of they live on, therefore us, and therefore it's Homo sapiens Neanderthal. Well, we see how advanced they are versus all the other versions, and they want to tuck that up into there rather than go, they really weren't as ugly as we've gave credit for. But in that same breath, we start to encompass all the way through, and like, well, we know we come from Homo erectus apparently, or at least some of us on the planet directly do, so we're going to say us, and we're going to even put that on there, whereas it's defined as a hominid and not a human. But there's discrepancies going on there. Let's continue.
The article articulated what I just said like this, quote, "One definition of a species is groups of interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. However, that definition may not apply for Homo species, as recent research describes evidence of interbreeding between Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and Denisovans, a hominin species discovered in Denisova Cave in Russia."
So we've already noticed this back at that time, where some people had Neanderthal and the other people didn't. Now they did deep check, and the first people they said that didn't have any Neanderthal actually had a little touch, because they've been impinged upon by people that had it. So the only reason there's a little skosh of Neanderthal in any of the sub-Saharan Africa is from admix, from people that had already had interactions out and did the back to Africa trek. It's kind of well known. But after figuring that out, that led down a rabbit hole, which ended up showing, well, whenever they started picking apart the junk DNA portions of it, they go, well, these songs are different. And at first, they're only able to project and pretty much say, well, that's got to be from this Homo erectus being different from that Homo erectus. But just like a Neanderthal is so radically different, they can easily pick it out. If you hear it, everybody goes, no, listen, that's a Beach Boys song. I know it. Yeah, it's a Beach Boys song. And to pick it right out. And if they can pick it that right out, that is something radically different, deserves its own separate name. Not like you're going to go Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. Yeah, it's just Homo neanderthalensis, isn't it? Yeah, but it's more sapiens. It's more evolved than all these other things, so they've got to try to put that. So you see, there becomes a juxtaposition there between the situation. It's a pretty cool animation here where it's already done quite a bit of changing. What they're doing is trying to show you some type of evolution that would lead you to believe into a modern human if they were to cram that together. But as we're showing in the video, it didn't really work the way that we're even trying to show in this little video clip here. Portions of it for certain people.
For example, a 2018 paper published in the journal Nature reported evidence of multiple episodes of interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Another 2018 paper, also in Nature, described evidence of an ancient human hybrid who had both Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. This has led some scholars to argue that many Homo species, including ours, should be lumped together, Stringer said. In this paradigm, modern humans are Homo sapiens sapiens, while Neanderthals are Homo sapien neanderthalis, and Denisovans are Homo sapiens denisovans. Stringer, however, maintains that humans and Neanderthals are separate species because their bone structure is different. If Neanderthals and Homo sapiens remain separate long enough to evolve such distinct skull shapes, pelvises, and ear bones, they can be regarded as different species, interbreeding or not. He wrote in an article for the Natural History Museum in London.
So that's a reality, and I agree with that second point there, that if they're that radically different, then they get a different name. That's the way classification has gone for every single creature on the planet. In fact, if they can find a few things different, they can get a new name for a fish. They can get a new name for this, a new name for that. But on us humans, they're trying to all say that we all come from the same philodendron plant. Whenever you look at it and you go, that's not the same thing. It's that simple. Other things show you that it's not the same thing and doesn't come from it. It actually goes from well back. Not only with just looking at the skeleton alone and going, nope, that ain't the same thing, but even blood types. Listen.
To that, I would add that there are other indicators that we do not all share the same ancestry, history, and therefore have biological complication with compatibility, such as with blood transfusions, or even with reproduction. If mankind evolved from the same African ancestor, then everyone's blood would be compatible, but it's not. Rhesus negative blood type appears suddenly around 35,000 years ago in Cro-Magnon types. Where did the Rh negatives come from? And why does the body of an Rh negative mother carrying an Rh positive child try to reject her own offspring? Humanity isn't one race, but a hybrid species. The article accurately describes ancient interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals or Denisovans, two other hominins that lived during the Cro-Magnon era, which is synonymous with Homo sapiens, as Cro-Magnon was the first modern human, a designation that in an anthropological context is different from anatomically correct human.
So anatomically correct would go back to Jebel Erud at 315 to 325,000 years we were speaking of. But if you want to go with, well, somebody that's still here exactly like that, genetic-wise even too, as it just showed right there with the genome being pulled out and saying, well, hey, hold on, those people are still here as being a modern human. And then there's an idea of being a modern human is that, and it's the holotype. So when we talk about others that are hybrids and weird situations like that, and sure, they're modern because they're here and it's now. But as far as a modern human under a classification state, and let's say if we're like an alien from a different planet and classifying it all around, they wouldn't put that label on it.
Nothing before Cro-Magnon is considered modern the way anthropologists use the term. That said, there have been other discoveries made through genetic sequencing which speak to further DNA contributions to some races from super archaic species, such as Homo erectus or habilis. The term super archaic implies the specimen are very primitive in terms of behavior and cranial capacity. Another term used is ghost species, as their genetic contribution has been detected but has yet to be officially verified in the fossil record. Present-day sub-Saharan Africans trace up to 19% of their genetic ancestry to these extinct archaic hominin species, likely Homo erectus or Homo habilis, that is not found in the DNA of present-day Asians or present-day Caucasians. So the prevailing notion that we were all hunter-gatherers in Africa and we all started to domesticate animals and we all started to establish large-scale farming and we all started to then evolve into agriculturalists is false. Some hominins were hunter-gatherers for 3 million years straight, and parts of their lineage still are today.
Such as West Sub-Saharan Africans, but it's actually all through Sub-Saharan Africa. It's kind of where the whole idea of us out of Africa comes from, because there apparently are Lucy type things around in Africa. Then there's these people who look like they're caught somewhere between, like a missing link. And then all the North African people were all Caucasian types, and they walked out, met a Neanderthal. Don't want to talk about how different that is, how it never really was in Africa. It shows because of its genetics not showing on anybody till later hybridization. So where it comes from, but it's so radically different. Just like Denisova, as soon as it showed up, I go, that's radically different. And they put it in the machine and they go, you know, all these Southeast Asian people have this. They've got some of the songs on this record. There's a Beach Boys song right here. Listen.
Such as the Dinka tribe, who are now considered pastoralists, as cows were introduced into Africa by Eurasians a few thousand years ago. But there are hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa today that only became agricultural because of interaction with other species, namely Cro-Magnon types, who were wearing clothing 30,000 years ago.
I've got a video coming on this. That's another reason I wanted to do this whenever I saw it, because he's putting together things that I already made this video. It's just some of the last little things in the Cleopatra crap that came out and so on. I've been throwing those out instead of putting this out because it's kind of in a different theme or a thought. But this idea here, and Cro-Magnons being shown that they're wearing pants and clothing and stuff like that over 30,000 years ago. It's not the Ugg caveman type thing or anything that anybody thinks about. His toolkit when he shows up is more advanced than anybody on the planet, and he carries it all the way through. Sun Gear Man is one of these instances, and I've got a video I'll put out, I don't know, maybe before this, probably after.
From the moment they popped onto the fossil record, fully developed with a massive cranial capacity larger than today's average, about twice the size of Homo erectus, who they interbred with. This hybridization event is allegedly described in ancient stories, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, which attributes the reason for this interbreeding to upgrade the primitive hominin or wild man to create a worker slave race so that the Sumerians didn't have to work so hard in the fields themselves. Similar stories can be found in India, which describe a simian slave race used by the gods, which were depicted as a different archaic species.
Now this India situation is even kept in the Mahabharata and tales that they have of these monkey people that were there, and supposedly Indra gave Nala a special hug, and that special hug made her children sentient. And in doing so, these monkey people helped them build the bridge that they call to this day Rama Setu, between there and Sri Lanka. They got destroyed just in the 1500s apparently due to a typhoon coming right through there, and right before that point people used to walk all the way across it. But so there's this monkey god and all these situations, and boy, I start thinking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and weird things that went on that led into that concept and the people they show you of that. But that kind of thing happened in a few different places, and we're lucky that we have a couple of mythologies that end up saying something about it, because it shows you that, well, They turned that into a nice little story. Yeah, well, it kind of was. They ended up developing a people and a friend, someone they could count on. A lot of things like that to go with it versus, well, a more modern time and an attempt in it.
Some in the UFO community insist that the hybridization was done via genetic engineering, like in a test tube, as put forth by Zecharia Sitchin. But if we're to go by what the Egyptians and Greeks said via Plato, the interactions seem to be sexual in nature. Quote, "For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws and well affectioned towards the God whose seed they were, for they possessed true and in every way great spirits."
There's that alien thing again.
However, over time, the Atlanteans became corrupt. When the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture, and the human nature got the upper hand, they then, being unable to bear their fortune, behaved unseemly, and to him who had an eye to see grew visibly debased. The time.
And what's strange about that is that's also reflected in the Bible as the reason there had to be a big flood. That the sons of God had gotten with these other people, and then everything got screwed up, and it's all corrupt. And he grabbed Noah, which was perfect in his generations, and, well, you know the story, but he ends up in the mountains of Ararat, that's the Caucasus Mountains that spread out for it. Of course, if you don't take too much into this story and actually realize this is Caucasian mythology from the ancient Middle East, and you compare it to all the ones around it, you'll realize that it is. And they don't really talk about anybody else. Just like when you look at Herodotus' old map, you look at a map of the Caucasian world and where Caucasians were. And it doesn't show sub-Saharan Africa or the bottom of India or Eskimos or anybody else.
The period of Atlantis was during the Pleistocene, or Ice Age, around the same time that these various hominin interbreeding events were taking place. If one were to assume that the specimen known as Cro-Magnon were the Atlanteans, as Cro-Magnon genetics are found on both sides of the Atlantic, such as with haplogroup X, as well as its toolkit, which was essentially the same bifacial tool technology as that of the Solutreans, who incidentally used a tool called an atl-atl, spelled ATL, which makes a spear go farther and faster.
These are people that are pre-Clovis, leading into the Clovis people. And in Clovis, you see some pretty big blades, but the Solutreans had these huge ones, and it's looked like there's being mammoth chasers and so on. And actually, Solutrean types and Clovis types end up getting wiped off of the face of the earth, apparently, with very few scragglers in America left over and then blended back into the Indians, which still show some of them, these northeastern Indians, haplogroup X. When you showed that a minute ago, which I've shown in my separate video about it, you can see the other part of it right there is ancient Anatolia, and the Phoenicians are connected with the same genetic. It does, well, hold on a minute, the Amerindians, well, you know, the Amerindians, half of what they have is ancient North Eurasian people, and it mixed with a blend from over there on the side. Well, yeah, but haplogroup and the way that works, that wouldn't say that these Phoenicians, how is that showing up? Well, it's kind of close to Michigan. It's kind of in that Canada layer there. But they quite often claim that ATL is not 3 letters that can be put together in any linguistics that they have with the Greeks and so on, or the Egyptians. So who is it? What's it got to do with? Well, Robert's going to tell you it has to do with Proto-Indo-European, which used to be called Aryan linguistics. That's the same linguistics that carry you all the way from Sanskrit, all the way through the whole Middle East, Near East, and going into Europe, all the way to ancient Irish, Scottish, Gaelic, all these languages, including Latin and so on, are derived from this same point.
While nobody seems to know the etymology or linguistic origins for the root word for Atlantis, ATL, it is interesting to note that Atlos, when translated into Indo-European, turns out to mean noble, which is also interchangeable for the word Aryan in Iran or India. According to many occult authors, such as Madame Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, the remnants of Cro-Magnon, or the seafaring race of the Pleistocene that many call Atlantis, settled in the Caucasus regions around Mount Ararat in present-day Armenia or Turkey at the end of the Ice Age, and at the start of the Holocene disseminated agricultural civilization and Indo-European languages as they branched out in waves, becoming the nobility of the civilizations that they then founded, from the ancient Hittites of Anatolia to the Tocharians of China,
to the ancient Egyptians over there on the left that start out with blue-eyed statues and it's carried all the way through. And talking about this before, everybody's like, oh man, you're Eurocentric, or you're sitting the other, and you go, no, DNA stepped up to the plate recently and they went, lucky. Oh, well, it said people of ancient Anatolia. You want to guess who those were? You wonder where everybody was when this continental ice shelf was pushing everybody down. I'm guessing they were a little bit lower, a little bit more south. Wouldn't you have a belief? The artwork doesn't lie. Where did they get this stuff from? It's all over the place, including depictions of Buddha, which if you just take the little squiggle off his eyes, that's somebody who's quite Caucasian type. It's not too hard to believe that it was. I had a guy recently when I talked about it said, oh, it's Eurocentric, and I haven't even mentioned Europe. It's a guy that used to be in Asia. But Asia doesn't mean Oriental. Caucasian. Asia Minor's Anatolia. Sumeria, all these places, all the way over till there, hey.
Ancient Hittites of Anatolia, to the Tocharians of China, the Aryans of Iran and India, to the Minoans, Phoenicians, an original race of North Africa and the Mediterranean, including ancient Egypt, Carthage, Greece, and Rome. In the 1930 lecture of the Aria, 33rd degree Freemason Albert Pike says, quote,
Albert Pike's a famous Freemason. It's kind of funny when I made a recent video where black people are trying to show the Masons and other people and talk about white superiority and stuff. When it's like, yeah, well, I'm pretty certain all of these high intellect people we're looking at are quite superior to the West Sub-Saharans. You're trying to live that little dream there that we're all the same. You know, if we're all the same, then I should be dunking a basketball and you should be building spaceships. But it's not working out that way, is it? In fact, if it ever does, it's because of admix and very much generations and generations of being taught by Caucasian people, which is going on to this day. In what we call the age of pandering, let's listen to the important words of Albert Pike.
This fixes the date of the reign of Menes, the great monarch of Egypt, at 3,893, and Brunson at 3,643 years BC. The common chronology makes Nimrod or Belus to have lived about 2,500 and Abraham to have been born about 2,000 years before our era. Yet from 7,000 to 10,000 years before Christ, there lived a people in that region which, as the bees send off in the spring their successive swarms, poured out its streams of immigration all over Europe and into India, Bactria, Media, and Persia, everywhere conquering the indigenous races and becoming the Celts of Spain, Britain, and Ireland, and the Northmen of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, the ancient Goths and modern Germans, the Slavic and Lithuanian races, the Greeks and Romans, the Hindus and the Medians and Persians. You hardly utter a sentence of our English tongue without speaking some words which was spoken in the same sense by that ancient people 10,000 years ago or more in the mountain valleys which they first inhabited. You have their idiosyncrasies of thought, the same indelible characteristics of race, for you are their descendants. From them you have your excellencies and your faults, your energy and your vigor of intellect, your philosophical cast of thought, your indomitable resolution, your persistent pursuit of the object of your desire to attain. From them, the religious leanings and inclinations of your minds. From them, your social institutions and relations, and the foundation stones of your laws, customs, habits. From them, all your philosophical and religious doctrines. They were white men, as we are, the superior race in intellect, in manliness, the governing race of the world, the conquering race of all the races. They called themselves Arya, the Aryans, the warlike, or some think the noble. They were the ancestors of the Greek and Roman heroes, as well as of the northern Vikings, and especially prided themselves upon which we call manliness, the virtues of the Roman. Although an oversimplification, the Aryans can be seen as sun worshippers, dividing the 26,000-year precessional cycle of the sun into 12, symbolically represented by a ram when the sun is in Aries.
And the last picture said you saw the zodiacal symbol and its symbol of the cross that's still hooked up to our religions today. But also the next picture over was a lamassu from the Sumerians, and it is the 4 cardinal points as seen in the cross in the same situation. You can also see things like they're all worshiping cows, and then they flipped over and then they want you to worship rams. What this got to do with everything? Well, it's Taurus, and then it's Aries. Then it became the fish. Jesus is a fisher of men. It's Pisces. And the next one is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And we're in it now.
So, before the roughly 2,000-year age of Aries, they would have associated themselves with Taurus, a cow or bull, which is attested to, for example, by the Minoan civilization. The bull, incidentally, is also depicted in ancient Pleistocene cave art attributed to Cro-Magnon, which some anthropologists claim is the astrotheology used during the Holocene, as many occult authors claim that the solar cults and mystery schools originated in Atlantis. My name is Robert.
And everything he said there is true. It's amazing. You put it all together. I like to make connection videos, and I like Robert's style a whole lot. We see that Orion there, and we see Taurus, we see the Pleiades and things like that. It's taken way back, and it's from the same similar people. And a Yamnaya culture and other cultures associated became the corded ware cultures that spread out in this direction and that direction and down in different ways. They try to tell you nowadays that all blue-eyed people are connected to some people that used to live in the area that they show you this spreading comes out from. And whenever you all of a sudden you start to put 3 things together, and then you figure out this thing about ancient boating, and this boat, which in the story they try to act like it's the first boat ever and it's an aircraft carrier. No, there were people that were well into boating. This hooks up to the Minoans and the idea of Atlantis and all of that too. Goes to a common people. But I guess the important thing in this video is that science has now backed off and said it's not even really out of Africa anymore. I'm thinking we're going to have to change that. It's out of Africa 3.2. But now we have all these verifiers, and it's like 4.0 or something, and I just don't think that we should probably even call it that in any way, because it doesn't work out that way. It gives people a false sense of what actually happened, and no one actually came from sub-Saharan Africa. And if you are a sub-Saharan African and you move up to Baltimore, it doesn't make you all of a sudden turn into a Nordic. Let me know what you think down below. Appreciate Robert for the info here. Peace.